This episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Welcome back, everybody. You are in the hearth of the home, the kitchen, in my kids' corner because it is summer and they are at camp. And oh my gosh, I am very excited for some travels this year. I have been thinking about traveling light, traveling easy, and of course, in that category, you are going to find this camera, the wonderful oldie but goodie, the Panasonic LX100. All right, so per usual, I have my notes, I have my Hello Kitty or whatever this is, pen, and we're just going to riff off of some scribble scrabble. I've actually had this camera for a while. It's one of those cameras that I love so much. Like the physical design and feel of this in hand is pretty much perfection in my opinion. It has just all the things that I want. It has the dials and the manual tactile nature of it. Has really smart switches for focus, for aspect ratio on the top. It is absolutely, frankly, perfect in terms of a camera body design for what I would consider the best travel camera you can buy. However, I love it more than perhaps I should. And I acknowledge it because the camera is not perfect and I just... All right, so this camera came out in 2014, so we are talking about a 10-year-old release. So this is the Mark I. There was a Mark II, but it has very, very minimal upgrades, to be honest. I would just go for Mark I myself. There were also the Leica d-lux options that came out, but they were entirely rebadged Panasonics with the Leica name on it. I think they are kind of overpriced, although they will have the JPEG color science of Leica. Back in the day, they could kind of justify some of those price hikes because they would include things like Photoshop or Capture One software when you didn't have an online subscription model. But nowadays, I would just say go for the Mark I because the upgrades of those other models were so minimal. Interestingly enough, Leica is now releasing the d-lux 8. I mean, it might be live at this point, to be honest, and I am very curious to see how that is received and what the experience of shooting it is like, because it is a redesign physically, but it has the exact same sensor, which is a micro four thirds sensor. It has the same processor as I understand it. So maybe they've updated maybe some of the color science, maybe the noise reduction will be a little bit more sophisticated. I don't know that the AF is going to be any different though, and we'll get into my thoughts on all of those aspects of the camera, but very interested to see where that lands in the market because I do think this style of camera is what manufacturers should be making right now. We all want this. So LX100 2014 it actually has a 20 some odd megapixel sensor. Oh no, sorry, 16 megapixel sensor. But the output is actually 12.7 megapixels because of this aspect ratio changer on here. So it has a multi-aspect sensor. Essentially what they've done is oversize the sensor in here so that it can do multiple aspect ratios without, it is a crop on the sensor, but they're using less of the sensor so you get the same megapixel output outside of, I think, the 1x1 size. So 16:9, 1.1, 4.3, and 3.2. 4.3 is going to get you the maximum use of that sensor. So that's kind of where I stay, but I do really enjoy the sort of playfulness of doing 16:9 and visualizing my world in that sort of cinematic aspect ratio. But just a really fun thing that is a dial physical switch on top. This thing is just full of physical delight. On the lens as well, you have a aperture selection wheel here, which is friggin' killer. And a shutter speed dial on top, as well as an exposure compensation on the top, and a silly filter button that you should be able to reassign, but you can't. An intelligent auto mode, so you can just click one button and hand this off to a stranger if you're a tourist in Paris and want something beautiful in front of the Sacré-Cœur. But coming back to spec land, all right? So we've got a 24-70 field of view equivalent lens here that is 1.7 to 2.8. So a nice fast bit of glass. Of course, that is going on to a micro four thirds sensor. So when you think of equivalent ranges of aperture or depth of field, while the light gathering ability will be that, which is fantastic, it gets your ISO to stay down, the sort of depth of field will look more like a, what's 1.7 times 2? 3.2 to 5.6, right? You can use this ring on the lens here. It is programmable, so it can be a zoom ring, it can be a focus ring. It is focus by wire and zoom by wire, less than optimal. I would say if this were to be an updated model, that is something I would love to see changed, but it definitely works in a pinch. And then on the back you have live view function, so you can cycle between your screen and your EVF, or it can just automatically detect your eye. Really well executed. This is not a surprise in modern cameras, but it was in this camera, and I love that. It does also have Wi-Fi, which is really fun and convenient on the road. You have an AEAF lock button here, so you can back button focus. It has a quick menu, a really nice little dial here with ISO. You know, you can shortcut and customize this anyway, not any which way you would like, but a lot of customization is available. I think that this thing has been thought out so beautifully. There's even a diopter on the EVF. So like, well done, Panasonic. This one knocked it out of the park. I am surprised to see these still going for a quite pretty penny. Anywhere from, I would say, like $500 to $800 on the used market. I got mine cheap because whilst the shot count was quite low on this when I bought it, it came sans any cap for the shutter button here. It was completely missing. I'm not going to take this off because I've glued it on, but what I did was I just played with it until I could see on the bottom display what the shutter speed was, and then I could figure out the corresponding clicks. And then I went online, I just downloaded an image of this camera from DP Review. I sized the shutter wheel on there down and just literally printed it on my crappy ass printer, cut it out, laminated it, and just glued it on top with some crazy glue. And voila, I have a really, really crass but effective shutter speed dial now. But it is really nice that when you're shooting, you can shoot quickly. There's no real blackout. I mean, there is, but it's very minimal for a 2014 camera in particular. And I don't feel like I miss the action when I'm shooting with this. It's a great street camera, and it's actually shockingly robust. I was out with this camera the other day, and I had it in my lap. I got out of the car, it dropped right out of my lap. Boom, hard drop onto concrete. Not a ding. Like, I was convinced this thing was broken. Can't see a mark. The camera does have image stabilization, which is fantastic, because with a camera like this with a micro four thirds sensor, you do want to keep the ISOs down. I mean, this actually shoots pretty decently up to like 1600. Pushing it to 3200, you can still get by, convert it to black and white. But what I find you lose out on is detail. So I prefer to keep the ISO low-ish and just use the image stabilizer. Obviously, if you have fast action in front of you, you will not be freezing that action with the image stabilization. But if you have a night scene and you can set up and keep your aperture and your ISO low, you can shoot handheld very nicely, easily at a 15th of a second, if not slower.
But what are you going to do with all those low light images once you've captured them? Put them on your Squarespace website, of course. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform that allows you to express your creativity and show up online the way that you would like. From their Blueprint AI and SEO tools that allow you to personally curate your own look and feel from the ground up with a guided design system, as well as optimized SEO tools, you get to create your own presence and show up to more people more often the way that you want. You can make checkout seamless for your customers with simple but powerful payment tools like credit cards, Apple Pay, PayPal, and in certain countries, even Afterpay and ClearPay that allow you to buy it now and pay later. And finally, you can make appointments or keep an online store so that people can book your photo sessions or buy your prints. So head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/1month2cameras to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Where I think this camera really shines is in bright, sunny conditions. I absolutely love the images in bright, sunny conditions. I don't love them when it starts to up the ISO and get into dark and sort of low light conditions, where I feel like my biggest issue with this camera is the loss of detail at higher ISOs. That's my biggest complaint, because everything else, honestly, is phenomenal. The color JPEGs are actually very nice coming out of this camera. I particularly like the vivid color profile because it's very punchy, and the reds actually remind me of like a Ricoh GR3, or sorry, not a GR3, the GR1 and GR2 that had those like kind of oversaturated, almost magenta leaning reds in a way that I say that I it sounds terrible, but I actually really like the way it looks, and they have a real good rich punchiness to it. The portrait color profile is also wonderful just at default. It's probably the most versatile and flexible profile. I wouldn't use it for landscapes, but for everyday captures, absolutely probably the best profile to use, and then you can always bump a little bit in post if you would like to. But of course, I'm always going to shoot RAW because I love post-processing. It is fun and time-consuming in the best of ways. So I shoot JPEG and RAW, which you can do on this camera, and I think it's awesome. I also love this flash. This thing plays with flash so well, and it's just a little external pop-on. Do I wish it was built in? Yes, I do. But having this option just sticking in your pocket and being able to put a flash on it is completely okay. Do wish it was built in, but love that it's an option, and it fills really nicely. It does not take batteries. It charges off of the camera itself. You do have to turn on a switch at the back, but once you have it fired up, you're good to go. It does a great job. The refresh is a little slow. That would be my only complaint, but it does a brilliant fill job and can give you that fun, poppy, full of energy vibe that flash photography delivers so beautifully on. And I know I mentioned this already, but in thinking about this lens, right, it's a 24-70 equivalent lens with a 3.5 or 3.6 to 5.6 aperture. That's a kit zoom on a DSLR or any mirrorless these days. Like, that's pretty friggin' awesome when you think about it. It's just like getting a kit zoom included in your camera, and it happens to be a really good, sharp, crisp lens. So whilst people might complain that it's not a constant 1.7 or faster, I actually think this is a genius compromise because it keeps the camera small, and again, if they were to refresh this line, I wouldn't change that. That's not one of the aspects I would change. I would just love a few other things, like a higher res EVF would be amazing. Built-in flash ideally, but I get it because this does also keep the size down, and I don't know, not much else I would change. Just update that processor and put in, some updated autofocus, and this thing would sell hella fast. This sensor really delivers on dynamic range. You can do a shocking amount with the dynamic range of this sensor. I think it is quite lovely. Again, dreams, but like if they would take the G9 II sensor and put it in this body, I'm sorry, but like what? Just saying. One other thing I would update would be a screen that could tilt, because I really do miss that. I just want this kind of a direct up tilt. This is not a video camera. I don't care about the video in this. I don't want video in this, like whatever. That is not my priority with a camera like this. This is a very photography focused design, and I would just like a direct tilt up lens so you could shoot at waist level style. This does have the old school DFD autofocus. So that is what depth, what's it called? Depth from defocus, whatever, okay. But it's effective. The autofocus in here actually works quite well. It has face detect, kind of on the slow side. I just prefer to use my sort of single point autofocus, focus and recompose style of shooting, which I'm just used to doing with all of my older cameras, so not an issue for me. I don't really, the continuous autofocus in here is not great, but it is passable, it is usable. You can also set this to a predetermined sort of like zone focus, right? So you can see the focus distance on the back of your screen and shoot it at f8 or f11 and street shoot your heart out, which is phenomenal. I absolutely love that about this camera because it is a very discreet camera, and I mean, people just don't care when you put this in their face. What I will say though is this ring is quite sensitive and gets knocked very easily, so it can throw your focus dramatically because of the focus by wire. It can just jump from like 1.5 to like macro focus in a moment, and that is something to be mindful of. It actually has a focus switch here on the side, so you can go from manual focus to aperture priority, and then, oops, sorry, knocking the camera. Not aperture priority. Guys, I'm sorry, I am a mess today. Other small things to note are that there is auto ISO in here. If you use it, it will, and you have OIS on, so your image stabilization is on in the menus, which I just always keep on because why not? But the problem is when you use that in combination or in conjunction with the auto ISO, it will always favor a slower shutter speed because it's going to want to keep the ISO down and lean on the image stabilization, which is all fine and well if you are in stationary circumstances. But me, I got kids running around, I'm in like sort of fly-by-life circumstances, captured moment stuff, and so I do want to keep my shutter speed up, in which case I am going to switch into more of a shutter sort of, a shutter, what is the word? Shutter priority. Guys, I haven't slept in days. It's honestly been a tear. The battery life, shockingly solid. And these are great little batteries, so easy to find, cheap, many third-party options available. This one, I don't even remember what I have here, but I have a bunch of them. It works also for the Lumix GX85, which I used to have, as you can tell. I have stickers all over my batteries, and I've got so many batteries at this point, you guys, I could open a store. The continuous shooting mode is actually pretty capable, so it can shoot 11 frames per second. This is not how I shoot. It's just not. I'm a very considered slow shooter for the most part, but if you did want to shoot it that way, there you go. That's what that sounds like. All right, so there are a few things that I failed to mention when I originally recorded this video, just because I was excited and I do really love this camera. Where'd she go? She's over here. I do really love this camera, and so in my excitement, I kind of overlooked mentioning some of the negative things, which are not insignificant. Basically, one of the major issues you're gonna have with this camera or any camera like it, these compacts that have fixed lenses, because they continually protrude and then contract, you are effectively working with a vacuum, and that vacuum is eventually going to suck in dust, and you will get dust on your sensor.
And that should be it.
So that's number one. Number two, that kind of drives me nuts on this is, unlike other cameras, you can't just hold down the play button to review your images. You do have to turn the camera on, therefore, again, protruding the lens and then contracting the lens when you go into playback. It's just unfortunate. I wish that wasn't the case because it would just reduce the risk of dust, but you can't get around it. My last con for this camera is going to be that manual focus, because in manual focus, as you may have noticed when you saw me on the street,
you don't actually see the feet and meters of distance that you are pre-focusing at for your zone focus, which is really frustrating. You just get this mountain and this flower and you have to kind of figure it out yourself. Thankfully, there is focus peaking in here, but I really wish they had the distance measured out at the bottom just for you to sort of see, because it has definitely thrown me. I'm like, where am I between the flower and the mountain? I don't really know. So those are my thoughts, and I do really like this camera. Second time owning it, so clearly just, I can't get rid of it. And I do recommend it, especially if you're looking for something great to travel with. So easy, so light, so fun. And that is all I have to say about that. I love you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.